am at Virginia Tech. I'm the Department of Agricultural Leadership and Community Education. I also direct the Center for Food Systems and Community Transformation in the College of Agriculture at Virginia Tech, and I use she, her on my pronouns. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Leah Kelinsky-Jones. I'm a civic science fellow, otherwise thought of as a postdoc, with the Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University, and was previously at Virginia Tech doing my PhD with Kim.
So you probably hold the record of being the first attendee from Johns Hopkins University to come to this conference.
Maybe.
I've been wondering that.
I've been here a long time. I would say more than maybe.
Well, all right. All right. Does that come with a sticker? Do I get a sticker? Like...
Award banquet.
No, no, a tip.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Come back.
The tip. Plant your corn early.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so this is a coupling intercultural praxis and agroecology. There's a lot of words up here, but we are going to attend to them all. To the complexity of food security development, international agriculture extension and education. So I'll start off with a couple questions. So before I hit those, so some of the work that we do, I like to kind of set the tone, right? We want to get us all kind of the same kind of place. We may have different places in that general space, but we have 4 questions that we want to just pose to you. These are called anticipated guide questions. And the approach is that you should use your gut. You either go with yes or no. And the purpose of which is for you to get into a place of critical reflection and to also kind of question your assumptions. What do I think yes? What do I think no? And there's truly no wrong or right. These are questions that we have derived purposely, so you kind of have to make a decision. There's not a lot of gray area here. And so again, no right or wrong. The idea is that we want to address the complexity in this space. So, and you don't have to share your answers. This is for your own, your own process. So the first question is, quote unquote, good international agriculture extension and education requires intercultural skills. Yes or no? So, do anybody like to share what answer they chose?
Yes.
Please.
So yes.
You said yes. And why do you think so?
I didn't know I was going to have 2 questions.
Well, here you go. Here we are.
Because by definition, international goes across nations,
Okay.
and typically nations have different cultures. And if I'm going to be successful as an extension and education, agricultural extension education professional, I probably need some intercultural skills.
Okay.
I do need intercultural, not probably.
Excellent. Anybody else like to add?
I also think yes, and I also interpreted good as effective, which just sounds like
How do you,
Yeah,
how do you,
okay.
how do you
Efficiency.
operationalize
Yeah.
good?
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. I am comfortable attending to cultural differences in my development work. The word comfort and comfortable.
Would you like to
and
share?
cultural differences.
Sure. Portia Child, she, her pronouns, University of Florida. My background is in intercultural competence building, not in ag. I'm new to ag, but in other parts of doing it. And so moving between cultures is something I practice doing for my career. But looking more at effectiveness and efficiency, of course, but also what's appropriate in this specific space. Recognizing that what's appropriate for me will transition or be different, possibly from other spaces. So I'm pretty comfortable with doing that.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else like to add? Yes, please.
So Claudia Diaz, she's at Harris University of Florida. I will say that kind of I'm not comfortable, but I'm capable, and so it's just sometimes there is this assumption that in order to be good, and I was like, sometimes it's uncomfortable going against how I was raised, but I know in sake of effectiveness, of accomplishing particular goals that either me and the community have in common, sometimes I'm willing to be uncomfortable, to be able to.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you. You had to give us your hand.
Well, and I was going to break the rules and put an asterisk beside somewhere between yes and no, but the rationale is that in some locations and in some cultures, I'm more experienced and more comfortable,
Sure.
but sometimes I have to interact or work in a culture that I'm very unknowledgeable about and thus much more
Sure.
uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And I would say, no, I'm not comfortable attending cultural differences, but I'm like the same as Grady, it's not comfortable, I'm never comfortable. Sometimes I'm uncomfortable, sometimes I'm energized, but I'm not comfortable. I'm energized, and it's beyond comfort. I'm enthused about working in those across cultures.
Excellent. This is exactly the space we want to create. So thank you for that. We have 2 more questions. Agroecology is a valid approach for sustainable agricultural development. Yes or no? I see some heads nodding. Anybody care to share why they're nodding?
I believe it's valid, not only in the sense that in the wide world of conditions, there are going to be places where different approaches are more or less appropriate, I guess would be the term that I would use. But also in that agroecology is it's such a broad suite of scientific and social and political things that I don't know what you can actually say is not adjacent to agroecology as a term from my perspective.
Great. Again, there's no right or wrong to this. We're moving down the continuum here of questions that are really kind of unpacking what we understand and what we may not understand. And that's what we're trying to do today. So please, I want to welcome you to not have complete comfort in your answer. It's perfectly acceptable and welcomed. All right, let's go to the last one. I feel equipped to address the ecological, social, cultural, and ethical dimensions of agricultural development work.
Ooh, there's.
It's a 4-barreled question here.
Yeah.
On design. We chose these words on design.
Yeah.
Yes or no? You feel equipped?
No.
No? Want to care to share why?
I mean, I wouldn't be in the workshop today if I felt fully.
Okay, well put.
Yeah, that's.
Or not. I mean, we're up here, but I would answer probably no myself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Equipped, now you said fully equipped, and that's how I first interpreted it, but I have tools.
Tools.
I have
We all
tools.
Okay.
have some tools.
I know that I've got some gaps too.
well, to that point, we want to recognize that everyone's on a journey in wherever you start and in your international development work, but also from an intercultural and from an agroecological perspective. We're trying to do a couple things today. We want to introduce, if you haven't already been introduced to Intercultural Praxis as a model that definitely is going to engage in those social, cultural, ecological, ethical dimensions. We are also going to understand a little bit more about agroecology and linking it to intercultural praxis. And we want to have more of a conversation with us together about our own experiences, questions we may have. I mean, I would hope you would have walked into this room knowing that you probably will walk away with more questions. And we want this to be an ongoing exercise. This is work that's been an ongoing conversation that Leah and I have been holding together through different elements of research. Primarily, a lot of the work is coming from Leah's dissertation research, which I'm sure she'd be happy to speak more about, but also my interest in the relationship between social transformation, critical pedagogy, and agricultural development. And so when you think about that critical element, where does power lie in these conversations, and how do we attend to that? So this is what we hope to do. First, we have intercultural practice. Leah's going to take this.
Yeah, so I don't know your name, but like you, Portia, like you, I was working in the intercultural education development realm, and then through partnerships with Kim, sort of worked to bring this into the agricultural extension education context. And Catherine Sorrell has a book chapter where she describes the theory of intercultural praxis. And what I like about it is that the intercultural competence models tend to depoliticize intercultural exchanges. So when I first learned of this model, the speaker who introduced it to me said, if you were to bring a group of students from Afghanistan and the United States together and think that that is a benign interaction, you're forgetting the fact that the United States has been engaged, or was at least at the time engaged in Afghanistan, the longest war of history. And to ignore the fact that that may be on the minds of the students from Afghanistan when engaging in this intercultural exchange is wrong to that interaction. And so this model helps us attend to that. And you can enter into this model at any stage, but I'll start with the inquiry stage, because to me this is more logical. The inquiry stage is really about who am I and who are you? And so it's associated with a sense of openness, a sense of curiosity, the willingness to suspend judgment, and simply learn. Moving then into the framing section, and apologies if you need a microscope, the thing, magnifying glass in order to read this. We're happy to share the digital copy afterwards. Framing really asks you to take different perspectives, to think about your own lenses. When I used to give workshops on intercultural competence, I would use a neuroscience example, which is relatively not scientific. But if you consider how all the experiences you've had in your life create these neuron pathways, and then you go and you experience something else, that input is going to go through that previous neuron pathway and inform how you make sense of it. And so the ability there is to say, okay, that's my operating system. How can I think about this example through someone else's operating system? The third, positioning, and yellow is probably the worst color to ever use on a slide, that's not accessible at all, is how you think about how our identities are socially constructed, how you think about how you show up in spaces differently. And so Kim is going to share through this presentation how we used this model in a study abroad to Cuba. And some of our students reckoned with what it meant to be a US citizen in Cuba and some of the reactions they experienced. And so what we worked with them to do through positioning is to think about what it means to be in Cuba and the relationship, the economic, political, and geographic relationship with the United States, and how your identity comes to bear in those moments. Dialogue, having conversations with people, right? It's learning from one another. This is inherently a learning process. Reflection, coming away from that, thinking about how it challenges your assumptions, how it challenges what you previously experienced. And then finally, action. What do we do with this information? And so when Kim was posing those anticipatory questions, what we really wanted to get you at the point of thinking is that this is a tool that you can use, a model for how to learn, how to engage. It's not going to necessarily yield all the answers, but it is a framework that can help you kind of go a little bit deeper into the complexity. Because we're never going to be experts in all of it, but what we can control is our degree of ability to learn and engage. And so the beauty of intercultural praxis is that it brings forward this process of critical reflection, thinking with a focus on action, right? So there can be a tendency to just like learn something for the sake of learning because we're curious, but what are you going to do with that knowledge? What social change can you affect as a result of your information? It helps us navigate complexity, as I've mentioned, and then it ultimately is this idea of socially responsible action. So as I mentioned, we're going to use as an example this course that Kim and I worked together on. Kim taught and I helped support, where we took students to Cuba to focus on agroecology, food sovereignty, and cultural resilience. And we have some photos here of the group, and this was like such a lifetime ago now. And it was a mixture of undergraduate and graduate students from, oh my gosh, like 3 colleges: Natural Resources, Liberal Arts, and College of Agriculture. And yeah, I think you want to, and Kim's going to contextualize the pedagogy that we used.
Just so you kind of put this, the model kind of into thought. We plotted this out ahead of time. It was somewhat with purpose. Yeah, the course, and I think to add to the course, it was a semester-long class. And we went to Cuba for over an extended spring break timeline. So it wasn't we were in Cuba for the entirety of the semester, but for me this model mattered because I wanted to ensure that we had engagement together throughout the semester. And it wasn't just the trip. The trip is part of the experience. It obviously contextualizes, but it was also about people exploring together, building relationships, and doing this critical reflection prior to going to in-country, and then coming back. And I'll share some examples of what that meant. And I'll be honest, I'm going to throw this out there too. Those of you who do study abroad work, this model mattered to me, and I think to Leah as well, that students who primarily do not have access to study abroad because of economic constraints could actually participate. We were purposely recruiting students, underserved students, particularly students of color in our college through Manners, who probably hadn't even left the state, nonetheless leaving the entire country to go to Cuba. And so it was really important for us that we created a model that was sustainable for them and for all of us. So one thing that we really focused on is, and this is probably very common for many of you, but the reflective papers. This is not necessarily just like writing a paper every week. There was readings that were assigned, larger contextual readings about Cuba and what is agroecology, what does this mean? So we're coming into with a sense of inquiry and if you will, criticalness. We don't know what this is. We need to figure this out together. And that was, setting the tone before the trip, obviously, and during the actual experience, students were instructed to continue to write, and they had, I think, at least 3 to 4 different major writing. And then even we had the assessment, those prompts that they had to specifically write to. So Leah actually constructed an evaluation, Intercultural Praxis evaluation, as part of the process. So the point is, the reflective writing and the reflection itself was embedded into the entire course at different levels.
And one of the things that I often use when I travel internationally for work is I honestly will journal. And I think that's such, we're all exhausted, we're all jet lagged, but I think it can be a really powerful yet underutilized tool.
Absolutely. So this was throughout the entire course, but understanding, I think we all do good work when we're well embedded in the larger socio-historical context of a place. And the relationship between the United States and Cuba in particular is one of which I think many people are not as familiar with. And we were very privileged to have the opportunity to work with an organization that actually had spent, this is their entire purpose, was to focus on intercultural exchanges between the United States and Cuba. And we were able to work with him to bring in, Dr. Scarpese into the space to provide some lectures. Well, Leah and I scanned the literature to make sure that we had a variety of different, literatures, and not to really make sure students could understand it. I was born in the early 70s, and I understood a sense of the Cold War, and I understood there were some levels of history that I was not personally around for, but a lot of these students, none of it, right? Just not aware of that certain kinds of relationships, the embargo. This was just literally a foreign concept. And so we had to spend a lot of time. My favorite will always be after all of that explanation and discussion, I remember a student like, but can my credit card work there? I'm like, no, it won't work. I told you this 1,000 times. This is, so it really had to be lived for a lot of the students.
Yeah, and one of the things that Kim does in all her courses that worked particularly well here is the latter half of the semester of student selection and facilitation. And so the picture here is one of our fellow graduate students, Courtney, who's right, and so he's pictured here with the Cuban and the Jamaican flag because his family is originally from Jamaica, and there's actually quite a large Jamaican population in Cuba, and so there was all of this wrestling and contending with these elements, right? And so afterwards he could, as part of his, I don't remember if he focused on Jamaica, but he did. Okay, so you could bring in pieces of your own identity as part of that scholarly inquiry before, during, and after the trip.
Right. So that's the last point. We did a
Oh, my
lot of
bad.
student. No, it's perfect as well. We did a lot of student facilitation. I'm a proponent of student-driven experiences through guided, process. But the idea of the latter half after we got back from Cuba, we went through a process where we identified themes that students wanted to learn more about. And we selected them, and then we organized several sessions. And this was a role play that the students, and I forget which this was specifically on, but the point was they are in control of the design, the thematics, and the actual, if you will, the readings. They helped put that together and implemented that. And then taking that further, we had a final symposium, and that included in a final paper, but the symposium was either you had a creative work, a poster, or oral presentation. We had several students actually do creative works. They did musical pieces, or they did a compilation of video and art display, so a visual piece. So the point is, this is what they came away with. They had to be really tied to their own. A lot of them did focus on a lot of their own identity formation through this process in agriculture, and particularly through the relationship that they brought forward with what is resiliency? What does it mean to be resilient in a global community? And how does Cuba allow us to learn from that? And how does that may differ from spaces or compared to spaces that I'm already familiar with? And so we were trying to constantly use that as a comparative. And I thought I was really pleased with what the students put together at the very, very end.
Yeah, and the poster picture here is asking us a question about like what does it mean to keep kosher in Cuba when there's like a high level of food insecurity, when you're living off of rations, when you can't just go and choose exactly what it is that you want to choose all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the student who presented it identifies as Jewish, so it's just like a perfect example of that integration piece.
That was perfect, yes. Yeah, there was every student truly selected a theme that moved them on a personal and professional intersection. Absolutely, every single one of them. And that was what we were hoping for. We were very pleased that they were willing to go there.
Okay, so just to go over agroecology briefly, because what we're wanting to do is to align intercultural praxis as a tool that one can use when employing agroecology within international development, extension, and education. So this is the model that the Food and Agriculture Organization has adopted. It's one of the only models adopted by an international organization. The United States, as an example, does not have a model of agroecology, though I've recently, with Kim and another person, wrote a policy position paper imploring them to consider doing so. And hopefully, I don't know if, I think this text may be too small, so I apologize. But the way that the FAO has conceptualized their model is on the outside we have these enabling conditions. Responsible governance is on your left, and a circular economy is on the right. And these enabling conditions then come together with practices, including recycling, efficiency, and resilience on the right. Above is this idea of diversity, polycropping, that supports integrated pest management as well as nutritional outcomes, that creates synergies with the social values at the bottom. We've got human and social values, participation. We've got cultural and food traditions on the right. And in the very bottom, one of my personal favorites, is the co-creation of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so what intercultural praxis affords us is a model to help us attend to the complexity of the system, right? To deal with how does culture interact with a circular economy? What are the practices around diversity? And how do we attend to particular values when it comes to resilience? And so you can see how all of these things interact, and so we can't just explicate the technical and scientific question without attending to the human variances in the middle. So others have continued on this work, and Wessel is one of a prime author continuing to conceptualize agroecology, and him and his colleagues have come up with these levels of agroecological change. For those of you who were in Adam's session yesterday, he offered some pieces about the tensions in the room when we speak about agroecology and other methods. And this kind of helps us contextualize that a little bit more, where we have level 1 is focused really on incremental and agro-system change. And so it's the reduction of inputs and the reduction of inputs as well as environmentally damaging inputs. And so for those, never mind, it's not. Level 2 would be the substitution of conventional practices for agroecological alternatives. So really kind of thinking about the synergies, not just the reduction of harmful practices. The redesigning of agroecosystems around those concepts I described in the FAO model. The 4th is the development of alternative food networks that connect practitioners and consumers. And the final is building a new global food system based on the values of participation, fairness, and justice. And so one of the things that the FAO model doesn't particularly attend to is the values explicit in that human kind of bubble that is described, whereas there are a number of scholars who offer the way that agroecology can help shift the food system towards equity and justice. And it's predicated on the notion that when you look at the global production of food, there is a sufficient amount of stock. It's about access. And how do we change the networks of distribution? How do we change the inequality that's embedded in that, because only some can access the food that is sufficiently produced. Okay, so in terms of the state of agroecology globally, among agricultural scientists and practitioners, this is sustainable agricultural practitioners as well as economists and agronomists. Agroecology is less familiar as a comprehensive approach. So it's more identified perhaps as an environmental approach, but less as that entire system that we talked about, less as that complexity that we indicated. Nor is it widely adopted or prioritized. It receives very little funding in the global north, with the exception of Switzerland. And it's, even though scholarship offers that agroecology can increase food security, can benefit nutritional outcomes because of the increased biodiversity, can support climate resilience, because if there's a massive flooding at the time of harvest, right, like you don't have just one crop, you might have, like, for example, I've been reading about the case of Puerto Rico in relationship to agroecology, and when Hurricane Maria struck, a lot of agroecological farmers not only were able to recover quicker, but they were also able to feed their communities in the interim, because they cut some of the tubers off the ground, and the tubers remained because their soil was rich, and so their soil didn't erode. We've also got the pest management with the intercropping and the attraction of beneficials that create an ecosystem grounded in harmony, and then environmental restoration. Alrighty. Your turn.
Right, so we're gonna do this together. So now that the timing has been off a little bit, I'm not sure how much time we have left.
I think we have 14, maybe less. I know the next session begins at 3:15, and it's 3:01.
Okay, thank you. So we know we threw some ideas out there. We have you hopefully, again, thinking through where you kind of sit with this work. You probably have questions, and so we do have that, we have some space for that as well. But before we get to that formal part, we wanted to kind of hear from each other. Meaning, what do you already do that aligns maybe with the intercultural praxis model? As its own thing, right? What have you done that you think really reflects that work? Or what could you do in the future that reflects intercultural praxis? So you can choose if things that you're currently doing or things that you'd like to continue, maybe try new. And then how does your work reflect agroecology principles or practices, or how could it? Now we know these are the kinds of, these may be higher level questions, and some people may have different ways to engage with that. So that's all, again, welcome. What we like to do is do some short conversations. We want to do you're all familiar with think, pair, share. So we're going to do that right here and right now. And we can maybe just group up really quickly. I'm thinking groups of 3 might work with the 3 of you, if you wouldn't mind, the 3 of you back there, the 3 of you, if you wanted to choose wherever group you'd like to go.
There's only 2 there.
Oh, there's only 2?
We'll just have a very great conversation, rich enough for 3 people.
Or Portia, Portia could join you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was our IT person. I was looking. You're welcome to join too. Of course, if you don't mind going to next to Mary. So just take a few moments, answer these to your sufficiency, and we'll come back together and we'll have an opportunity to hear from you as a group.
You guys have all the answers?
Yeah.
All right. Hello. How are you?
I think of these,
So,
the easiest to implement in my life is the framework piece, because I was raised cross-culturally, so
So I'm new to ag and enslavement, my work has been around international education, just generally speaking. So when I've taken students abroad, one thing we always try to do is to expose them to local, not only food cuisine, but how ag works in the local places. And so when I think about the U.S., I think a lot of what was known by or done by indigenous people, First Peoples, is usually dismissed. And so how do we bring those things into the conversation and find the value in that? For example, soil erosion. Indigenous people have been saying for generations, centuries, that, don't throw out the trees because the soil erodes. And here we are dealing with soil erosion as we move things to build houses or whatever. So bringing those things and so even though that's a practice for them, how it gets removed or displaced, because we have a quicker, better technological way of doing something in theory. As far as the entry-based changes and so-forth, I've taken students from multiple communities and see what's been helpful for them, how they understand themselves. I've been both to Cuba and actually Claudia and I just came back from several weeks ago looking at that same block farmers and how they are diversifying their crops because everything was down just like
for them to actually think about what their assumptions are, because typically there are wrong assumptions. They're not just assumptions, but the wrong assumptions. When you reflect,
So I thought a lot about what is the best thing to do for study abroad, and when I thought about
we don't benchmark.
what the data showed was that it was really essential to that reflection work where you left, so that's what they're talking about, and they engage with the students, before they left, about that. And I didn't know that I was doing the intercultural practice model, but I actually do almost all, I think I do almost all of these things in that reflection, in that course, right? I get them thinking about who they are, I get them exposed to the culture, imitating food, cultural practices, and then when we get there, I still find them journaling. I give them questions about the experiences they had during the day, what they feel, how did that challenge some of their perceptions, that kind of thing. So I'm doing this whole thing, I didn't know it had a name, which is cool. But then when I go abroad, I started engaging these things at the forefront
What
of my
assumptions
mind.
do I
What is my position in the society that I'm living in? What lenses am I bringing? What frameworks?
So it sounds like we had dialogue that wasn't just about what to eat for dinner. So it feels like face validity check of our session. Maybe we've made something happen. So is there a group that might want to share out? Whether it be themes from the group, whether it be something that really struck you, surprised you, an aha moment. It really can be anything. Yes, please.
So we can share, for many of us was kind of the first time kind of using the Intercultural Praxis model, and so we comment about some similarities with the experiential learning model that is used a lot in agricultural education, but also how other kind of principles of adult education, flow within these. Mm-hmm. And so I think for many of us, the usefulness of these tours is that you don't need to change everything, whatever, but it's on what parts of the extension projects can we create some space for dialogue, right? But at the same time, we talk about how mindful we need to be, particularly in international development projects or even in local extension. The time frame that we have to build trust with the communities or to report back to our funders, not necessarily allowing most of us to truly be fruitful to doing all this.
Yeah, those are two really good reflections. And if you ever get the chance to read Sorrell's chapter, you're going to see a lot of familiar names from the adult education domain. But it's true. I mean, whenever we think about doing participatory work, which this is in nature, right, what do we always bump up against? Resources, time, money.
Yeah.
So it's very appreciated. Yeah.
Leah, I hadn't heard of this, and I was really excited as you were presenting and I was reading and I was going, oh yeah, I actually do this in my study abroad. I had no idea that I was doing something that had a name and that had a purpose. That's great. It's purposeful. But what I appreciate when I'm thinking about just, how to be more purposeful and ensuring that they get opportunities to kind of keep going through this in the course before they go, during the experience, and then in their reflection after that experience, and making sure that it's just a part of that throughout the time. And then the other thing that I was thinking too is that I was just commenting to my peers here that I kind of go through this on a personal thing, and on a personal note as well. And I also didn't know that these are things that I do every time I go abroad. I first and foremost start with the curiosity to know about the place, and I start to research, and then I, think about the history, and then I think about my positionality, and then I think, so it was interesting to go, oh yeah, no, I totally do that for my students and for myself, and so it's affirming that this is a process that has been established, that works, and that is, yeah.
I just want to comment maybe just briefly on the positionality piece. That's what I think feels special about this model. I mean, I'm trained as an educator, and there's a lot of work in reflexivity and positionality, but what I like about this is that it really demands that it's not just of yourself, but with the group in which you're with, which we know it can be really challenging because people are on their journey, and it's hard to, and I'm going to share really briefly, one of the students who, when we went to Cuba in particular, it was like the first few days we were there and really having some strong emotions as a young black woman in Cuba, and trying to understand why she was feeling the way she was in a place where people looked more like her than she had ever experienced, in a more predominant, like this is where I'm at. And we have to spend time with that. And that's clearly, to me, that's absolutely related to how we have access to food and agriculture, because people's experiences or lived experiences inform the way they have access to those resources and how they have access to the way they determine their lives. And so that's such a really, to me, a really important piece to it.
It's amazing you mentioned that. That's exactly the experience I shared. When I went to Cuba, that was the first time in my life I've ever felt like I fit in and blended in. I lived in Asia, I've traveled abroad, Europe, etc. That's the first time in my life I felt like, oh, I belong here. I'd never seen murals of black people on walls. I'd never seen statues of black people in a positive light. And for the first time in my life. And so hearing that another student, and there's going to be some just differences in ages, I'm assuming, that had a similar experience or awareness for me is just really fascinating to hear you say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It was a really important moment. We spent time with to make space, to make proper space for those experiences. And then related them to the questions around resiliency in particular, because there's a lot of complications around the concept of resiliency, like assuming that people should be self-resilient when it's actually about are the conditions allowing us to be resilient. And so that will allow us to be critical about some of these core themes.
Mary, one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking regarding your study abroad, first of all, I'm sure you do more than just something. And second, I don't believe we did this in ours, and I'd be curious to know how it would work. But it would be to use this model with students. And so as we had them do reflection papers, what would it mean if we asked them to think about their inquiry, their framing, their position out, use that as a framework for reflection at different times. And I think that could be really interesting because, then we're really involving them through this model of their own development.
Sorry, I guess I misunderstood what I was supposed to do. That's what you're
saying.
Oh, you
do that?
That's what I do.
Yeah. Oh, well,
that's what I do.
Oh,
I thought that that's what this was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. I meant because we didn't introduce this as here's a way for you to think about your own. We didn't introduce this.
We didn't use the model as here, this is what we're doing, everyone.
Yeah.
It was more it was embedded in the framework, right? We didn't show them.
It was background on the
potatoes.
No, I really love this.
Awesome.
Thank you for presenting that. I really love this.
So when should one do reflection?
Well, if you're an overthinker like me all the time.
Well, different kinds of it, right? I think that's a really excellent question, because I think we
in a situation like you were talking about,
right,
where in the middle of the semester you did on a deep immersive experience. When should you do reflection?
Right. I think to me it's an embedded process. I don't think it's one moment and you stop. I think it's way for me it's tied to what maybe educational products as one thing. You want them to write, to think, and be part of this longer process. So for me, it's embedded through all of those assignments. but there's also the dialogue. I mean, in the course itself, in the classroom, on-site, to be purposeful about hearing them. So for example, yes, we're all gonna have a debrief. I mean, there's always those things. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of that. I find some of the contrivedness around, let's reflect. I'm like, no, this is about reading each other and understanding where people are at and really making a space for me, it means food. It means engaging around preparing meals together, which we've always had food in the room, always made sure that, I mean, this is in the classroom as well, of course, and there was loads of things for us to
So much
eat.
food.
But that was the point, we have to be intimate with each other. And that's not easy for everybody to be vulnerable, and to build those capacities for me is really important. So when you say when to reflect, I think you're trying to build everyone in that you're trying to get them in the same direction, but knowing that there's going to be some of your peers, your colleagues, or your students to know that they may be in a different place. And I think there's also recognizing that some of those vulnerabilities are for them to not share, and to recognize that we, make space for people to pass. I think that's really important.
One of the things we try to use or want to use is preflection
Yeah.
as a
Right, the pre and post. Right.
yeah, pre and post. I think, and Grady probably knows where this comes from in doing surveying. You have to have a benchmark. And a benchmark is a known elevation. It's you know someplace, and then you shoot out there somewhere or another to get a turning point that tells you what, and from that turning point you go to another one and stuff. But if you don't have your benchmark, none of the rest of them make any sense.
Yeah, and that is a best practice.
Okay.
And that was embedded in this course. And I think the pre-flexion really focused on what are the questions and assumptions that I have?
Yeah.
And then
we talked about that. Many of those assumptions we'll find out were false.
exactly.
Well, that's okay.
And I think the three-part, the pre-flexion, the immediate post, and then a couple weeks later the symposium, where we kind of brought it all back together, was really powerful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I would agree. I think also weekly engagement was, reminding travel. I love the pre reflection, but that's just a moment in time. I mean, we're talking about every week having students be reflective about the ideas that they're engaging with, right?
Yeah.
And that's including really hard ideas like agroecology. What does this mean to you? How do you engage with this? What are your questions? What do we need to know next?
Some of us learned from our military that after an event, we have AAR, EDD.
What do those stand for?
AAR, EDD stands for After Action Review Every Damn Day.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so we come off of a mission, and I mean everybody from the major or captain down to the non-military folks engage in the after-action review right then and right there, while it's fresh on your mind and stuff. And anything goes, and no one's held responsible for anything they say. But they have to say what they think, what they felt, what they did right, what they did wrong.
Yeah.
And then,
I think that's really, I think we're getting close to time, because I think we're going to transition.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to make one other thing on that, what you mentioned, ARE thing. One of the things I was thinking about is, I like the what. Wait, there's a reflection series of people using experiential learning. It's like the what, the why, the so what or something. I can't remember what it is. My brain is jet lagged, but. Well, I think we're nearly out of time. We need to let the other session. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to share or ask before we say our thank yous and we close?
This is obviously a scratch on a much larger surface that we wanted just to show. Again, agroecology is one big complicated concept, and we think there's merit to explore further. But to do so, we have to think in these very dynamic ways, and that means thinking about how we position ourselves in these international agricultural experiences, as well as, to me, this is where power lives. This is how you position yourself within these larger socio-political environments, which are ecological, ethical, social, and cultural, right? Back to that last question, one of the first questions we asked you. So we hope you at least walked away with some nuggets, and we are always here to answer questions or continue the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much.